Hi, I'm Bob Delange, and this is my wife, Gaye Delange, spelled G-A-Y-E. And that brings up a point that our son said when he heard about my SSA. He said, "Oh, I'm triply blessed. I have a gay dad, I have a gay mom, and I have a gay sister," since his sister does suffer with SSA also. And so this is a remarkable thing to me, to be able to be on a video like this that could be seen by practically anybody after living a life for 47 years where I kept everything a secret and nobody knew about my SSA struggles. I did have the support group and email lists that I joined that helped me to get some of that out in the open, and that was all very beneficial. But now to be at this point, a little scary. I have a family of 5 sons and our adopted daughter. Our 5 sons are all married and have children of their own. And we have a very good relationship with all of them, even though they know all about me now. I grew up in an era where there was practically no help available for anyone with SSA, particularly if you were a member of the church. There just was no good information available to leaders, and people didn't understand the situation, and that's why I kept it a secret all of those years. I don't know when my SSA really kicked into high gear, but it certainly started at the age of 13. Because at the age of 13, I had a scout physical exam, and I was told that my testicles hadn't descended. And to a boy of 13, just in the puberty years ordinarily, that is a devastating thing to find out. At the time, I didn't even know what testicles were, because in those days, sex was never discussed. And so I went home from that exam, found a book in my parents' closet on marriage that did discuss these things, including all kinds of sexual terms, and I found out what they were good for and what I therefore was lacking. And that was a very big psychological problem for me. It left a psychological scar that lasted for many years, even though my testicles did descend within about 2 years after that. And so I feel this was the start of my SSA because it caused me to have a great curiosity and a great envy for other boys. And those 2 things, I think, were my downfall later when I entered into sexual relations with other men. And that created a continual cycle over the period of all 47 years that I dealt with SSA. I would go for a period of years where I didn't experience much problem with it. And then it would all come crashing in on me, and I don't know what always caused those. In some cases it was disappointment of one kind or another. But it would come crashing in, and then I would go off the deep end and go into a period of having sexual relations with other men. So this went on for 47 years. Each of the periods where I was involved was probably from 4 to 9 years, and the good times were anywhere from about 4 to 9 years as well. And so it's the roller coaster effect that so many of us know about in having good times and then going into a period of bad times. And it was at the end of this 47 years that the Lord started to intervene in my life. I'm very happy to see the help that's available to people now. It's terrific, and I hope it continues to just get better for everyone that has to deal with this subject of SSA, which I call a Goliath. And that would mean that we have to conquer it, I guess. And I tried to conquer it for all of those years all by myself. I thought that's what I had to do before the Savior would accept me. And so I tried. I would get to a period in my life where things went better for a number of years, and then it would all come crashing back in on me. The things that I was trying were mainly centered on asking the Lord to take it from me, because I knew nothing else that might work. And I think many of us that have SSA do that. We ask the Lord to remove this and take it from us. And I wondered why he didn't, since that was my great desire, and I wanted to remain a good member of the church and to have my family and all the things that we expect in a good Mormon setting. But it wasn't taken from me. And so each time this would return to me, I would become more discouraged, more frustrated, and more disappointed in the way things were going in my life. And so then the cycle would start over again, and this probably happened about 4 times, where I became one who felt it necessary to act out with other men. And I knew that was wrong, but at least it seemed to satisfy some things that were going on in my mind at that time. I can't explain why I became involved that way, but I did. And so then I would go through a period of acting out for a period of years, and then I would stop it and start doing better again for several years. And so it is the old roller coaster effect all over again in my life.
He served a mission, came home from a mission. My sister dated his little brother. I took a typing class from his father at Weber State, and I knew that he'd received a Dear John on his mission because I took a class with the girl he was supposedly waiting for him. I knew he was a good guy, and we had a mutual friend, and I said to her, if you ever get a chance, put in a good word for me with Bob Delange. And she was a nurse, and I was a nurse. And one day she went into the lab where he was working after he came home from his mission and said, I know somebody you ought to take out, and gave my name. And he called me up, sight unseen. He needed a date for a buddy that was going away to the military, and our first date, was at the top of the Hotel Utah, dining and dancing. So it suitably impressed me, but it was downhill after that, because he was a poor student, and most of our dating was done at free church dances and playing pool with his family at his family's house in the basement. But for me, there was an instant attraction. He was a good dancer. He was good looking. We had a great time, and I think he did too. So you tell your part of that now.
Well, I hadn't experienced this, maybe once partially, of feeling so enamored and attracted to a woman before. And that was the one that was supposed to be waiting for me while I was on my mission. But this one was over the top by far. And so we just couldn't wait to be together again. I was a student at BYU. She was living in Ogden and was in nursing. every weekend I would come home from BYU. We would be together practically the whole weekend doing various things. And then on Sunday night I would go back to BYU, not having prepared any lessons or done any studying, and hoping there wasn't going to be an exam given soon after. But we made it through that year by being together on the weekends, every weekend just about. And it was a most exciting time in my life, far more exciting than anything else that I've experienced. And so from there, we went to Seattle for 4 years of postgraduate work, of graduate work, I should say, where I got a PhD degree. And again, during this period of time and the early part of my marriage, and all through my teenage years, I really didn't understand what I was dealing with. I hadn't become involved with other men at this point. I just had these feelings that I didn't know what to do with. And so I really didn't know about SSA. We didn't call it that then. It was just homosexuality. And I didn't think that was what I was dealing with. It was only when I started acting out, which is a term that may be synonymous with having sexual relations with other men. It was only when that started happening that I really realized, yes, I have SSA, and I've got a problem. And so that was when I tried all of the things that I knew how to do, which was to read up in as many scientific journals as I could about homosexuality, and none of those gave me any hope or gave me any real insight or understanding. I had the whole university library where I was a professor that I could study some of the best books that were known at the time, and I did that. And then I asked the Lord repeatedly to take this from me. Now, the question I should have been asking was not that he take it from me, but that he help me learn the lessons he wanted me to learn from having to deal with this. And that came later, but not for 47 years. My SSA started at age 13, and it was my big secret for 47 years from then until age 60. And so that was when all of this transpired. And I might add that for me, this was the most difficult thing that I've ever encountered in my life. A lot of people concentrate on how difficult it is for various other people in our lives, such as my wife, but it was the most difficult thing I had ever encountered or ever have encountered in my life. And I even got to the point where I considered leaving my family and the church and going into the lifestyle. And I think the only thing that stopped me from doing that was a faint glimmer of hope that it could be dealt with successfully, and that I could live a normal life. Quote, normal, whatever you want that to be. I loved my family more than anything else that I knew of in this life, and I really didn't want to leave them. And so between the glimmer of hope and knowing that the Lord's church was true and my family, I stayed with my family despite how I felt. I know many may not make that choice. And I came so close to making it myself. When the Lord started to intervene in my life, He allowed me to take an early retirement from my position as a university professor. And when He allowed that to happen, He also opened a way for us to move from Los Angeles, where we were living and where all my triggers were, to Utah. And so we moved here probably 2 or 3 years before I finally found the help I'd been seeking all my life. And when I got here, I still had the SSA feelings. I still had the despair and the discouragement and all of the other things that go along with it. But at least I was away from things that would tempt me to become involved with other men. And so I purposely kept that knowledge to a minimum. I tried not to ever discover where anything gay was going on in this state. And lo and behold, in our ward bulletin, there was an announcement about an Evergreen Family and Friends meeting, support group, and the number that we could call if we were interested. We did call, not because of me, but because of our daughter, who has SSA also.
We wanted to find out more about it and how to help her.
And so we started attending that support group. And it was just tailor-made for my circumstance, because it had a wonderful facilitator in the group who would invite various couples or people to come and tell their stories. And several of the men had made significant progress in ridding themselves of the inappropriate things of SSA. And so I immediately pricked up my ears and went and talked to each of them and asked them how they had done that. In every case, they said that the only way it happened was when they finally became submissive to the Savior and turned over to Him the battle that they could not win. That made quite an impression on me when several of them said the same thing. And so I decided that I was going to do that as well. And so in my prayers, I started picturing an altar with me kneeling on one side and the Savior on the other side, standing in all of His glory. And I would plead with Him to take the inappropriate things from me, that I didn't want them anymore, and that I couldn't remove them myself. And I told Him how weak I was in regard to this problem. And gradually, over a period of time, I felt a lifting of those burdens that I had carried for so long, and a lifting of a darkness that just seemed to pervade in my soul. And in its place came wonderful light and truth and this incredible peace that took away all the turmoil and commotion that I had been experiencing over all those years. To me, it was a miracle every bit as much as any of the miracles that we read about in the Scriptures. And it was indeed a mighty change of heart, comparable to Alma's. I will never forget that feeling of being at peace with myself and with the Lord. I didn't immediately tell my wife about what I call my healing. I didn't tell her because she had made some comments over the years about gays and I didn't think that it would sit very well with her. But then she found some things on my computer, things that I had left behind when I healed about a year before. And so she brought those up. Where did these come from? I couldn't explain where they had come from, but obviously they were leftovers from my days of viewing pornography.
And you might say that I found them, and then I said to him, we need to discuss what's going on, and I think we need to strengthen our marriage. What can we do about it? We need to have a heart-to-heart talk. And he said, well, why don't we go by ourselves and write what we think each of us need to do to help our marriage? And so I said, okay, if you want to have it that way, we'll do that. So he went in one room and I went in the other room. And a little while later we got back together, and he said, you read yours. So I read mine, and then when it came time for him to read his, he said, no, you take it and go read it in the other room. I went in the other room and read what he wrote, and my heart stopped. It was like my whole world came crashing in, because in it he tells me what has happened during these 47 years that he was dealing with this, and that I knew nothing about it at all. You have to understand that our marriage was a good marriage. He was affectionate to me, our intimacy, there wasn't a problem there. He was perfect in leading his double life. He always had an answer as to where he was and what was that I believed. It was part of marital trust, call it what you will. So to read this was, I thought my world had come to an end. My first thought was run, just run away.
And she would have done that earlier in my 47-year period.
Right.
If I had told her then, she tells me now that she probably would have taken the kids and run.
If he'd have told me when we were raising our family and when there was no information about SSA and no help, and all I knew was what was in the media, I'd have taken the kids and run, and probably gone back to Utah, and who knows what would have happened. He may have gone into the lifestyle. But by this point, I had had some experience by going to the Evergreen support groups, and I had met wonderful men and women who had been dealing with this. And so I stopped and I thought, he really is a good guy. He has been a good husband. He's been a good father. He's provided for me. I've got to think about this. And so I went back into wherever the living room, and he could see that I was shaking. It was an emotional thing that I just shook for 2 or 3 weeks before I could really compose myself to think about what had happened to me and what I had just found out, because we had been married 38 years at this point, and everybody thought we were the happy family. When we were young marrieds, we were the happiest marriage in the ward. We had to give talks on happy marriages. And so now all of this is a lie, and I'm thinking...
It wasn't a lie.
Well,
it was just different than you thought.
Came back into the living room and approached him, and knowing that my world was just falling apart, and I was shaking, and I couldn't collect my thoughts, but thought enough that I would at least hear him out, see what we could do about this. And prior to this, I had noticed this year that he was going through his things. We were not having couples prayer. We were not reading scriptures together. He was doing this by himself. He would spend long hours in the scriptures and a long time in his personal prayers. And that was new. That was something that I noticed. And so when he told me that he had, overcome this according to his definition, I knew that's what he'd been doing. But he hadn't talked to me about it, hadn't thought anything about it. So I thought, okay, maybe we can work on this. And we decided at that point, from that evening when he told me, that we would pray together as a couple each night, and that we would read together as a couple each night. And we did that and have been faithful for 16 years doing that. Our subject matter started with SSA, obviously, and we read all kinds of books on SSA. And I would talk to him and I would say, is that how you felt? And he'd say, yeah. Is that how you felt? Yeah, that's how I felt. Is that what you were doing? Yeah, that's what I was doing. So we did that to start with. And then as the years went by, now it's long gone reading that. We read gospel subjects, the scriptures or the ensign. But when that happened, we decided we would go to counseling, need some counseling to help me deal with this. He was okay, but I needed to deal with. So we went to a counselor, and the counselor was very helpful to both of us. He said, your issue and his issue are totally different. Your progress and his progress are totally independent. He's coming out of a dark hole, and you have just dropped yourself into that, have been dropped by him into that deep dark hole. And so that helped me to realize that, okay, I can work with this. He then said to me that forgiveness and trust are two different things. They don't come together. I can forgive him and still not trust him. And that was helpful to me. And that I didn't have to forgive him tonight, I didn't have to forgive him tomorrow. But I needed to leave myself open to eventually doing this. That was very helpful to me. He also told him that your life is now an open book. You have hidden your life from her all these years. Your life is now an open book. And if she asks you anything, you will answer her with a smiling face and thank you very much for asking. Similar to that, and not say, oh, not again. So with that in mind and with that suggestion, and with my being a nurse, I like details, things like that, we went back over the years of acting out, all the things that went on, because I had to put in my mind when that was happening so I could deal with it, process it, and let it go. And so the first weeks and months after this, that's what we did. I'd ask questions, he'd answer. I'd ask more questions, he'd answer. Then I'd say, is there anything else you want to tell me? And he'd say, well, as a matter of fact, maybe I ought to tell you this. And this went on until his slate, he told me all about it, and I had knew all the details. But it helped me to understand and then to let it go, because now it's not a mystery to me. I know what happened. It hurt a lot to go back and realize he was leading this double life when we were having kids married in the temple, when he was serving in a bishopric, when things like this that were important things. And that was hard for me to understand. And I still can't quite understand that. And then the other thing that hurt as I thought about my life was that part of his involvement with men occurred in the 80s when AIDS was in the forefront and San Francisco was in the forefront, and he actually did a year's sabbatical in San Francisco at that time. And so that was very meaningful to me. And I said, I have to know if you are negative. I have to know that because of what has happened. So he agreed to go and have an AIDS test, an HIV test, and we did, and that was an experience I don't ever want to do again, to sit in the office and when it was taken, and then we had to come back and hear the results. But obviously the results were negative, and that I crossed that off my list. Okay, he's truthful about that, and the trust came back over a period of years. But I would ask him, where are you going? What are you doing? All of this. What have you been looking at on the computer? And he would answer me, and he left it open. The forgiveness also came in time. I learned full well that the atonement applies to me as well as it is to him. His for what he's done, and to me to help me heal and to recover and to let go this terrible, terrible pain that I was feeling. It took me a number of months to really put into words what I was feeling. And what I was feeling was a loss, a deep loss of what I thought I had, of the marriage I thought that was faithful and that he was faithful. I now knew that had not been the case. So I had to deal with that. I had to have the Savior help me to deal with what I had lost and didn't have, and to realize that's okay, it happened, but you can move on from here. And so it was over a period of time that through prayer and supplication that these feelings of anger and hurt and sadness and all of that began to be lifted, like in his experience were lifted. And so as we have done this through the years, life has gotten better. When we were married and I thought everything was fine, we had a good relationship. But after this happened, and as we learned to communicate and really communicate truthfully, the marriage has improved. Our intimacy improved. It has made life honest now. We have an honest relationship. Our children all know, their spouses all know. We told them separately, and they were all very loving and kind. And in fact, as we were preparing for this interview, two of our sons gave us each a blessing to help us get through this. And so the Savior's been immense help to us in our relationship and in this journey that we've traveled, and that we hope others don't have to travel like we have done it. Anything else that you can, I forgot?
After I had told my wife, we then went to the bishop. And I was put on informal discipline for a certain period of time. And as the end of that time was approaching, our ward was moved from one state to another. And now the bishop had to consult with another stake president, and that stake president said, no, you need to double the amount of time of discipline and hold a formal disciplinary council. Well, here I had what I called healed, and I thought I was doing well, and now they say, well, because you're doing so well, we'll give you an additional length of punishment. That was how it looked to me at the time, and it really did not sit well with me. And I began to question whether I should stay on the course I was on. As my wife mentioned, I was doing a lot of reading in the scriptures, and as I was reading in the last 2 chapters of Hebrews about being subject to those over us, the Spirit whispered to me and said, it's a test. And once I really realized that that's what it was no problem to go ahead and double the time of my discipline and to have the formal disciplinary council. And so we fulfilled that part. I got my temple recommend back. And that was a good feeling to be able to go to the temple again and enjoy the blessings there.
And to be worthy to do it.
And to be worthy to do it. For probably, there were times in my life where I was probably worthy to go to the temple, but there were times when I wasn't.
We now have total trust, total honesty. He can now share all his thoughts and feelings with me at any level, an intimate, emotional level, sexual level, any kind of intimacy as you would define it is better now because of having total honesty, total trust, total clarity as to what our relationship is now. As we're in our, quote, golden years, life slows down and you have more time to appreciate what you have had in life, the lessons you've learned, and the legacy that you're going to leave. And our greatest joys now come from seeing our children grow up uprightly before the Lord, and they're doing that for the most part. So that's our greatest joys. And the gospel has made this possible, and I have a testimony of this gospel and what it is, and the power of the atonement in dealing with any problem, no matter how difficult, no matter what, whether it's the sinner or the sinned against and anything else. The atonement covers it all, and I'm grateful for it.
For me, these last 16 years have been the happiest of my life. I can honestly say that because I now have the Spirit with me, and that makes a huge difference in one's life. I had the Spirit at times during that 47 years, but there were times when I knew it had departed from me, and I don't want to go through any more of that kind of life. My wife has become one of my greatest supports, and I don't know what I would have done without her, honestly. And I think the Lord knew that we needed each other and brought us together. We met on a blind date, and I'll forever be grateful that He allowed that to happen and that He allowed me to marry and to have a family, because it's through my family and my marriage that the happiest times in this mortal life have come. I know that we'll have happier times in the next life if we get to where we hope to be, and we hope that we can be there with our entire family. But above all else, during this period of time, I have come to know the Savior better, and have felt so much closer to Him than I thought was possible. And I feel His power in my life. And once you feel His power, then you know that He lives. And you know that His atonement is for you, not just for someone else like I thought for so long, that it really didn't apply to me. I have felt that atonement in my life, and I'm grateful to Him, and grateful that we have the gospel and the church, and I know that they're true.